Welcome. You're listening to This Leader, the podcast. If you lead people and are seeking the transformational, high-impact secrets that will lead to greater joy and fulfillment in your work, will optimize your team performance, and will help you create a happy, highly productive workplace, then you are this leader and you're in the right place. I'm your host, Claire Laughlin, and each week my guests and I will explore the mindsets, techniques, and actionable strategies that will help you build the career, team, and organization of your dreams. Because I believe no one should have to suffer in a dysfunctional workplace. Let's get started. Why do you do what you do? What deeply motivates you? What happens in your body and your mind when you encounter conflict? And where do you find strength and resilience when you need it? These are important questions we need to ask and answer in our quest to become more connected and self-aware leaders. I've been exploring these kinds of questions for many, many years. I've discovered a few enduring truths about myself. First, one of my most profound motivations is having choices and experiencing a sense of freedom. This is such a strong driver for me. I think we all want to feel autonomy and we want to exercise agency, but this is a particularly strong driver for me, so much so that I was willing to go into business for myself and leave the security and promise of a steady job and a pension. I've always been like this. My greatest memories are really about moments where I felt so free. Like my sister and I, we used to ride our bikes along the beach on summer mornings with music on our headphones. And what I remember most about those mornings, beyond just the smell of the salt water and the feeling of sunshine on my face, was this feeling of being so free. So this has been an interesting discovery because while it might sound very appealing to some of you, I've done enough self-discovery to now really understand how this drive for freedom can also really get in my way. For example, in my quest for a sense of freedom, I got fired from a job once. I simply could not or would not conform to their rules for when to arrive at work. Now I just think of that as a serious lack of self-discipline or something, but I used to try to keep my options open at all times, right? So that I always had plenty of choices, which often meant overcommitting and not reserving enough time for myself and my family, or not committing to something, even if at times I was inadvertently hurting someone else. So those are just a few examples, but I can tell you that knowing this about myself has allowed me to make much better choices and to have much better relationships as a result. It's that self-knowledge that I'm after. And another discovery I made is that I really crave harmony, probably because it helps me feel free. And in my quest for harmony, I will reframe almost any situation immediately, looking for the bright side, And while that helps me keep a positive outlook on life, which I appreciate, it can also mean that I sidestep some of the important and less comfortable parts of life, which in the end, ironically, can actually rob me of some joy. So I'll sometimes catch myself escaping mentally or emotionally from hard things instead of just being really present with the discomfort. And that's always been a struggle for me. All this to say that the quest for self-understanding is a lifelong pursuit, as far as I can tell. And for me, it's been a real gift that keeps on giving. A big part of my journey has been learning about myself through the lens of the Enneagram. And my friend Roxanne Harrison, today's guest on the podcast, has been my primary guide in this area. Roxanne is a certified narrative Enneagram teacher, an advanced Lee Holden Qigong teacher, and a certified somatic Enneagram practitioner. She was first drawn to these modalities in 2014 when she suffered a physical injury that gave her no choice but to sit still and to get to know herself better. In these quiet moments, she realized that she'd been carrying this intense resistance around with her all of her life, and she started to wonder why. And you'll hear her tell this story in our interview, but I've known Roxanne for a few decades now, and I've been so lucky to be a witness to her journey, and I've certainly benefited as she's learned and studied and applied her knowledge and become a wise expert and compassionate guide in these different traditions. Roxanne uses the Enneagram of personality to help her students understand and build self awareness to their habitual patterns of thinking and feeling and doing. And she also incorporates Qigong to access the body's life force and transform stress in the mind and heart and body. Tapping into body energy can help us clear our thinking and improve self regulation and enhance vitality, something we should all be working toward. So, using both Qigong and the Enneagram together creates really a profound opportunity for self awareness and self transformation. In our conversation, we explore so many things like different centers of intelligence that we can use to help be more resilient. And we talk about 3 treasures that we all have access to and the 5A framework you can use as you practice building greater self awareness. There's so much packed into this episode. I don't want to wait any longer. So here's my conversation with Roxanne Harrison. Welcome, Roxanne. So excited to have you on the podcast. Hello. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Claire. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Just to get us in the right space here, our listeners have heard a little bit about you in the introduction, but I always like to just have you introduce yourself a little bit. Say a little bit about your special expertise, because you are a person that does so many different things. So let's just get some context here in the room today. What are we talking about today?
I guess you're asking a little bit like, well, how did I get here?
Yes.
I feel like many of us, I landed here through my own experiences, right? Through my own challenges. In 2014, I had a neck injury. I fell and had an injury. And I was so frustrated because I couldn't do the things I love to do. And so I decided I might as well meditate. Don't know why I thought that, but I thought I'm going to start to meditate. And what I realized was during meditation was that I had a lot of resistance in my life. That I don't want to constantly in this place of resistance. It was like a no before a yes, right? Always for me, a no before a yes.
A no before a yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I had a lot of physical pain, and pain in the body and resistance equals suffering, right?
Yeah.
And so your mission of this podcast is to help leaders self-develop, right? To give the space to develop. And so I actually found myself with the time to be able to start to do that for myself, to really figure out, why do I have so much resistance? What is it that is creating all this resistance? Because I was exhausted. That's really what I figured out, was I was exhausted.
From the resistance, from saying the constant kind of no before the yes.
Exactly. And it was like exhaustion in my head, my body, my emotions. And so you talk about this transformational high impact secret. For me, I can articulate this now, but this took a lot of time. But it's really about being at choice, that I recognize, hey, I want to be at choice. I want to be able to move, for me, from resistance or reactivity, whatever that looks like, to choice. And in order to do that, I have to be able to self-regulate. I've got to be able to go inside and be able to know what's happening in my inner landscape, be aware, and then make choices. And I started to recognize, we go inside and we go, oh my gosh, there's this inner voice, and there's a lot of judging, and there's a lot of criticizing, and there's a lot of self-rejection. And so I was like, hey, what is the operating system here that I actually installed? And what I discovered was that the seeking, I mean, I do consider myself a seeker, but the seeking, I was seeking externally, and what I really needed to do was seek internally. And Qigong, we talk about the 3 treasures, right? And so those treasures live within us. And I think the other thing I figured out as I kind of went inside was, hey, I actually have these gifts, these strengths that I've actually covered up. I have these things that I can bring out into the world, but because of these adaptive strategies, I've covered them up. I've moved away from them. And one of those adaptive strategies is this resistance. So it was a lot of connecting the dots. So then I started to recognize, oh, this resistance is a protection mechanism, right? It's like, this is the way I protect myself in the world.
Okay.
And so this is where the Enneagram comes in. So this is what I want to really talk about today. You said I do a lot of things, which is true. But the 2 things I would love to bring together are the Qigong piece and the Enneagram piece, because the Enneagram really helped me understand from a cognitive perspective, why I do what I do cognitively. And the Enneagram is a dynamic map. And so it can help us really understand how we can grow, how we can shift, where our blind spots are. And then the Qigong is really a direct experience. It allows us to get into our body and have a direct experience with ourselves, which often, again, you don't know what you don't know. But once you kind of go in there, it's like, wow, I'm spending a lot of time outside of myself.
Interesting. Yeah. So, one thing I have to ask you real quick because it's going to be on everybody's mind. What are the three treasures?
The three treasures are these three kind of elixir fields, these fields of energy of the head, the heart, and the belly.
Okay.
Now, you'll hear in different cultures, them called the three centers of intelligence. Sometimes I'll refer to them as the three centers of experience, but they're really these three energy centers that have a lot of information. And as we start to develop a three-centered practice, and as we start to go inside to work with these centers, it's amazing the alignment that you can start to have, right? Because we live in this world that is horizontal, if you will. We live in this very binary world. And when we can connect through the three centers vertically, something can shift.
Okay. That was a lot. So ultimately, the very special space where you work is this combination of Qigong, which activates these three centers of energy, these three treasures,
Mm-hmm.
and the Enneagram, which is a deep tool for understanding oneself and a dynamic tool for understanding how we operate in the world. And you came to this because you had an injury and you started to just sit and be with what was happening with you. And you realized, oh, I've got a lot of resistance. This resistance is something that I've developed as an adaptive strategy, which is like it's serving me in some way. It's serving me and it has served me. And so I've strengthened that. But because I've done that, I've sort of blocked or hindered other gifts that I could be bringing into the world. Was that a good summary?
That was a beautiful summary. Often the things that have happened to us, they turn out to be these gifts, right? This injury of mine actually put me on this path that then revealed this whole world to me that I would have never, ever explored. And I love how you frame this covering up our gifts because I notice, I'm sure you notice too, when we work with clients, it's like a lot of times coming in, it's like, I need to be fixed. What's wrong with me? I need to change. I need to shift. I need to be, so then I can be more successful. I can be happier. I can be more at ease. I can, whatever it is.
Right.
My somatic Enneagram teacher, one of my favorite quotes from her is, "We are not a problem to be solved. We are a mystery to be leaned into." It's a wonderful quote. And it's this invitation to come into this work knowing that there are forces, there are unseen forces, right? There are these kind of universal forces at work. And if we can loosen the grip, and again, this is, I think, what Qigong allows us to do and the Enneagram, and come into it looking at the mystery, it really can soften the journey a little bit.
That is so profound because I do believe that so much of, I guess I'll be very broad here and say Western culture, but so much of Western culture is problem oriented, problem solution, right? So we're looking for a problem and we're looking to fix a problem. And when we apply that thinking to ourselves, we fail to see the beauty and the wisdom and what it is that we are doing now. Whatever my habits are, I came to those honestly.
Yes, exactly. So this is a beautiful point, which is when we start to recognize, because of course we come unconscious, like we don't know what we don't know. And then we come into the work and when we start to see, oh, I'm actually doing these things, there's now a conscious awareness around them. But if we just start beating ourselves up, it's just we're hanging ourselves out to dry. And I think also the Enneagram is so good as far as a self-awareness tool to help us understand why we have this thing called personality. and what it's done for us. And I tell my students this story. It's like once upon a time, there was this huge statue of Buddha outside one of the monasteries in Thailand. And this is a true story. In 1955, they actually they went out to move this huge statue. And one of the monks noticed that there was a crack in the clay. And so he gets his chisel out, he gets his hammer out, and he starts to kind of chisel away at the statue. And he discovers that the entire statue is gold, pure gold. What had happened was the Thai people were very smart. They covered up all their valuable statues in plaster to protect them from being stolen during the war, during the Burmese-Siamese War.
Yeah.
And so I love this metaphor because this is, again, like the invitation here is get your hammer, get your chisel out, and we start to chisel away at the gifts, the treasures, the gold that we have hidden away. A multitude of reasons that we start to move away from these natural gifts. Sometimes our gifts aren't reflected back to us in a positive way. Culturally, there might be shame around them. There's a multitude of reasons.
I think it's absolutely spot on. And so much of what listeners probably come here for, what I work with leaders to do, is to cultivate that awareness, be present, be here in the moment, understand how am I showing up. And it's big stuff, so you're talking about like the Enneagram being another really rich dynamic tool for us to understand ourselves and what our natural gifts are. And I know you haven't said this yet, but I know you will, what our typical methods of resistance are and how we do sort of fall into some patterns with how we develop these forms of resistance.
Yes. And before we move away from these gifts, there's something that was so helpful for me when I started to understand this. So I want to say it and maybe say it a couple times, really, because it's so important. Because when we start to work with a tool like the Enneagram or Working Genius, whatever tool you're going to choose to work this kind of self-awareness piece, it's like you'll start to recognize, oh, okay, there's a gift that I have. So as a type 8, I have an aliveness. I have a strength that I naturally bring into the world. As a type 7, you have joy. You have a freedom in you, right? If people were to ask you, or if you were to ask people, describe me, I'm sure a lot of people would use the word joyful, positive. People would probably use words for me like she's got a real aliveness to her, a real strength. She's a protector, right? And that is true.
Yeah.
And what happens, and this is the piece I want to really hone in on here, is when we become really identified in our ego, when we are feeling that we need to defend or we're having a moment where we're reactive, the gifts can become a distortion of themselves. It's like we start to effort to be the thing we already are.
Okay.
I'm already alive. And yet, as a type 8, what happens when I get triggered, when I am in reactivity, is I start to really power up and I bring too much energy and too much force and too much control and too much bossiness, right? There's a too muchness that shows up. So again, we know type 8, we can say great leaders, decisive, they make things happen, they're a protector. And when I am not conscious and when I am not present, that gift can look like a distortion.
Right.
As a 7, your joyful, positive attitude can suddenly become something where there's only blind positivity, where I'm not able to see the negative. And we know 7s, they're practical, they're productive, they're bringing joy into the world. But you may know from your own work, there are times when I only saw the positive and I didn't allow myself, again, this is your resistance, is like, and didn't allow myself to see there might actually be something that's not so positive in this situation.
Yes. Right. I can stay in a situation a long, long time because I will continuously talk myself into, but wait, there's a good side. I'll index so strongly on the reframe of any situation that, perhaps I've looked back in the past and been like, I could have probably exited that situation a lot sooner than I did. And sometimes the discomfort with conflict, I've worked with that my entire life. Like, how do I stay present with the discomfort of that, which I don't know because I don't know anybody else's experience, but for me is very uncomfortable. Like I'm a harmony seeker. I want to get up in the morning and every day to be a joyful, happy day, right? And not every day is like that. And so sometimes that's part of my work. I got to work with that for sure.
And I know you've done a lot of this work. And so then you start to recognize there are patterns of how a particular type shows up in patterns in the body. And this is where this work with the somatic Enneagram and this teacher, Marianne Gilbert, has brought me to this place of now taking the Enneagram of the personality and understanding it from, say, a cognitive perspective of really understanding my beliefs, this emotional habit of excessiveness. And then now, how is that kind of showing up in the body? And some parts of our body just naturally feel, when we go in there, more alive, more vibrant. And so as we work in Qigong or in meditation, we start to go, oh, I'm noticing some blockages. I'm noticing some areas that feel constricted or tense. And this is why I love Qigong, because we give the body an environment to heal, which is what it naturally wants to do. We just create the container in Qigong. And I tell my students all the time, because I'm not an acupuncturist, they'll say, wow, I cannot believe how much better I feel. And sometimes I say, I don't even know why it's working the way it's working. I came into the practice for physical pain. And what happened was then suddenly I noticed, wow, I'm feeling way more relaxed in my body. Or, wow, my muscles are actually relaxing. My bones are supporting me. Or my head feels a lot more spacious suddenly. What's this all about? I had really no intention of becoming a Qigong teacher. It just happened because the practice, I could constantly notice how it was impacting my life. I was able to stay with myself. I was able to stay and not jump out.
Yeah. To your adaptive strategies, right? To jump too quickly to those adaptive strategies in any given situation.
Exactly. And be in choice, right? Which again, you need to be able to self-regulate. You need to be able to stay with your breath. And this all takes time. I think what I've come to know is that we do complicate things. The ego wants to keep things really complicated.
Right.
It's part of the ego strategy. The ego is like, don't get rid of me. You need me. And so it complicates things. And so none of this is easy, but there are simple practices that can get us more present and more at ease and more in flow.
Yeah, let's go there. I want to talk about those because I definitely think the key point here from a leadership perspective, there's so many, but the one I'm going to hone in on here is that as a leader, it is so important for you to understand yourself and your impact in the world and be in the point of choice. We want to make conscientious choices about how we operate with ourselves, how we operate with others. And that's one of the hallmarks of real leadership is being willing to take that on and say okay, I'm diving in. I'm going to learn more about myself. I'm going to learn more about the impact I have on others. And I'm going to strive to improve that in terms of improving my impact, improving my own experience of the world, improving the way I show up, the way I lead, all those kinds of things. So I want to say out loud again, and I'm sure people will hear this in your bio and everything, but the idea here is that we're not going to go deep into the 9 types of Enneagram today, or even really into much of a practice around Qigong. But I wanted people to really understand how you brought those two worlds together to enhance your ability to be present in the moment and stay in that place of choice, because that's what's so critical for all of us as we lead our way through life, right? As I lead my way, as I lead others, that kind of thing. So let's get into a little bit of practice here. How can a leader utilize some of these simple practices to bring themselves back to the moment, to be in that point of choice when whatever is happening? I can imagine any given work day, things are firing up. There's a lot going on. There's choices, decisions to be made. There's stuff's going off the rails. How do we use this?
Okay. So this brings me back to this 3-centered awareness. And I want to just thank you. You're really summarizing what is a complex kind of new idea, even for me, right? Of bringing all of these wisdom traditions together. I appreciate what you're doing here. What does it even mean to be a 3-centered being or 3-centered awareness? And what does a practice look like? What does it mean to have 3-centered awareness? Well, it just means I have the ability to think, feel, and not to behave, to have a felt sense all at the same time, to experience the whole body all at once.
Okay.
Now, again, this sounds easy. This is not easy.
It's not easy, especially like for me, I'm a head type. So I'm automatically going to go to my head and start thinking things out.
That's right. So this is where the Enneagram and this practice kind of come in, because I am what we call a belly type, types 8, 9, and 1. And what that means, it just means like I automatically have this sense of bringing energy into my belly, often to defend and buffer. Whereas you as a head type, your energy goes up into the head because sevens are one of the quickest thinkers, right? You can just feel the energy up in the head. So sometimes you're cutting off what's happening in my heart. Same for me. It's like, hey, what's happening in my heart? What's my heart telling me? So three-centered awareness, there's intelligence in the head. And of course, the Western culture really favors that. There's intelligence in the heart and there's intelligence in that belly center. The first thing I tell students is, okay, we have these three centers. Where are they?
Yeah.
Let's actually first locate them. I'll tell students, take 3 fingers, go to your belly button, and then go deep in towards your spine. Now, here's the first thing I usually notice is students feel like those centers are right up in the front of their body. That's very common.
Right.
So even kind of pulling the center, our mass back to the spine and visualizing this elixir field, this field of energy, what we call a dantian in Qigong. And so how do I do that? Well, this is a great practice for a head center type for everybody, but particularly dropping that energy down into that lower dantian is standing in what's called like a horse stance. It's basically a squat, like a wide-legged squat. So your feet are out wider than your hips. They're pointed out at like 10 and 2. And then you're just coming down into a wide-legged squat.
I spent the whole day like that yesterday pulling weeds.
And did you notice any of your energy dropping down into your lower dantian?
It felt great, actually. I felt very present all day. And actually, I had some amazing creative ideas.
Interesting.
Like it was sparking. Interesting. No, now that I think about it, I spent the whole day basically like down in that kind of a squat because we've been working on our garden and I've been doing this. And I was fascinated by what was happening with my creativity. Great. I'm glad you told me that. That's good to know.
Yeah. What it brings up for me is, so again, earth energy, yin energy, grounding energy. You're working with the earth, right? You're connected to nature.
Yeah.
So these are all external resources that I would say to you, hey, you're externally resourcing by really being on the earth that way, by interacting with nature. So these are all really grounding external resource kind of things. Then when we internally resource, we connect to our breath. Or an internal resource might be, we feel gratitude in the moment for the land I'm on. So there's internal ways to resource. There's external ways to resource. Music can bring so much joy into my heart. That's an external resource for me. But then once I'm inside, can I actually internally resource through feeling compassion for myself? So it's good to start to think about what are ways I externally resource and then how can I internally resource?
So interesting.
This dropping into the belly center for a head type, it's so helpful. It can actually dissipate some of that fear that we know lives in the head center.
I know we're talking so much about the head and the belly, and I don't want to miss the heart. But if I'm in my head, how many times have I said that? Like a billion, right? Oh, I'm in my head. I'm too much in my head, right? If I'm having one of those days where I'm overthinking things or I'm getting a lot of heat going, right? Because I'm trying to work out a problem and it's not coming to me intuitively. It's more like I'm striving to kind of crush the idea instead of like, okay, just be with the creative energy, right? So I can externally resource by, like you said, listening to music, for example, or putting my hands in the dirt or going out and trimming plants. I do that all the time. Or I can internally resource by maybe taking a few deep breaths or feeling my belly, like you said, like pushing, like just sort of visualizing that energy center, for example, or giving myself compassion. Would that be about accurate?
Yeah. And also, when I start working with people, they're like, I don't feel anything inside. So even visualizing is difficult. Okay, you're telling me where the center is. So then what do? Well, we can knock. we knock, we tap, we activate the energy. So Qigong tools, right? We start to activate. Oh, I can knock the lower dantianas. I can start to knock or tap or, open the palm and activate. Oh, I can actually feel a little bit inside. And we know from the Enneagram, there's certain types that the mechanism, the protective way is to actually numb.
Yeah.
So there are certain types, like I think of a type 9, that it's difficult because really the mechanism is to numb, and the energetic way a 9 can operate is they dissipate. It's almost like there's a disassociation. The energy goes everywhere. So again, as you work, these two tools are so useful because if I'm working with a type 9, I know, oh, the tendency here is the energy's kind of dissipating. Whereas for a type 8, it's completely different. The type 8, it's like the energy just comes right into that and it's focused and it's going to be out and up and intense very quickly. So here, this is where it gets interesting. The motivation is the same for the 8 and the 9. The motivation is I need my autonomy. I want boundaries. I want justice, equity, fairness. These are all what we call belly center motivations or body type motivations. And when I don't get that, I respond, but I respond in very different ways.
I love what you just said because I guess I'm a little bit conscious, of course, wanting to go into all of the types. I think we may need to save that for part 2. But what you're saying is we each have these sort of these ways, these predictable patterns, so to speak. If you understand your Enneagram type, one of the great reasons for studying the Enneagram, and it is a very rich tool,
Yes.
is the way that it can deepen our understanding of ourselves and our habits. On this podcast, I've talked about habits of mind, for example, or it could be habits of behavior, it could be habits of emotions, whatever that is. It's like we have these standard ways of approaching the world. And the Enneagram can give us such an interesting lens on that because it helps us see not just the common motivations that we might be feeling, but the very different ways that we can turn those common motivations into behavior, practices, habits.
Yes. One of your episodes, you talked about your default channel.
Yes.
The emotional default channel. This is another way you're kind of pointing to start to recognize your habits, your default channel, my operating system, but whatever you want to call it, right? It's these habitual ways that we show up called our personality.
That one was called Emotional Contagion. Just little note there. In case somebody hasn't listened to it, that episode was titled Emotional Contagion, and it might be useful to listen to that as well.
You've spoken about it just in a different way. That's great. And so I think what might be helpful, because I know one of the things that when we spoke originally kind of piqued your interest was this fight, flight, and freeze response. We hear a lot about it. Oh, she's in fight, flight, or freeze. And so this has been super helpful from a practice standpoint for me, but also I think I can maybe incorporate a little bit of the type structure and the motivation here. I think you're starting to understand the reason that we become kind of divided in our body, or that the body feels like it's shutting down, or that I'm not feeling anything, is because we have experiences in our lives that happen when we're kiddos. And so we create patterns when we're young to limit abrasive situations or traumatic events. And so it's like, okay, well, that worked. That worked well enough. Okay, I'm safe. I'll try it again. And yet I'm starting to maybe hold back expressions of how I really feel, or again, because maybe our parents aren't reflecting back to us. That's the way we need to show up, or they want us to show up. There's, again, tons of reasons. And when I was teaching in jail and prisons, what really became clear to me was that the trauma, the deep trauma that many of my students had experienced, there was so much internal chaos happening for them all the time. They were constantly in fight, flight, or freeze, even though they were in the safety of a classroom. That was a real kind of wake up for me, is just how chaotic somebody's internal world could constantly be. And so this is where the Enneagram is super helpful, because it tells us, okay, your personality has developed in one center, the belly, the heart, or the head.
Okay.
Belly, 8, 9, and 1, these meta patterns, right? of human behavior, type 891, the heart 234, and the head 567. Now, of course, we all have a head, a heart, a body, but it just tells us that the personality is actually developed in that center and it uses the resource and the energy in that center. Okay, so you've already alluded to this, Claire. You've already said, oh, when I get stressed, I go up into my head and I rationalize and I problem solve. And this is how you're using the energy of your head. So it's like you have a lot of resource there, but you also can be very limited in that because that's where a lot of your reactivity and your habits live. So if we want to look at the emotional response here and the reflex,
Yes.
the fight, flight, freeze response, if we look at type 8, 9, and 1, the reflex here is to fight.
Okay.
And the emotion associated with those types is primarily anger.
Okay. We'll come back because those three look different.
They look very different.
8, 9, and 1. Okay.
The heart center here, again, the primary reflex is freeze. And the emotion most associated is sadness or grief. And then the head types, the primary reflex is flight. And then the emotional response here is around fear. Again, we all have fear. We all have sadness. We all have grief, but it's the first hit.
Got it. Let's take just a minute here and let's go in to each of those. Okay. Roxanne, this is so fascinating, and I feel like we could talk for hours about it. But let me just repeat back what I heard you say, because I really want to kind of make this point and echo this point. So you're saying that there's the 9 types and there's patterns within the types, and that there are 3 are sort of what you'd call head types, 3 are heart centered, and 3 are belly centered. And that for each of those, we might fight, flight, or freeze, right? So me as a head type, I'm going to flight because I want to escape and sort of fly away from hard situations or something. If you're a heart type, you may have kind of a freeze response, although those look different depending on which of the 3 types you are. And if you're a belly type, you might have more of kind of a fight response or an activation response.
And those responses, those primary responses, are linked to the motivations of the types. So we won't get deep into that. But for a heart type, it's all about connection. I want to stay connected. So it's not very intelligent to flee or to fight because then you lose connection. Of course, I'm going to have this freeze response around the heart.
What would that look like, though? What would that look like? What would a freeze response around the heart look like? Because I know a lot of my listeners are very heart-centered, very people-oriented, very tuned in that way.
So when you start to go inside and really start to recognize, oh, I'm feeling that freeze in the heart, it actually feels like a panic. There's a panic in the body that can set in that's like, I'm losing connection or I've now disconnected from this person. And they're very attuned. Heart types are very attuned. Am I in connection with this person? And if it's lost, there's a panic that'll set in. And that's when I know I'm in overwhelm.
Interesting.
And then there's a real freeze. There's almost like a disassociation. And when you talk to heart types, they'll be like, oh yeah, this sounds familiar. So these are the clues the body's giving you. And again, it's not to say, oh, I mean, so much of my time was spent like, I don't want to feel this. And it's like, this is the intelligence of the body. And if we just let it happen, the other side of it, there's something so much more on the other side of it.
This is so rich and wonderful. So let's say, and I'm a big fan of the Enneagram. I know it takes years to unpack, really. I mean, if you really want to understand, it's a rich system. And I know that you can get a grasp of it in a short-ish period of time, but that if you really want to use it as a self-understanding tool, it's kind of a commitment there. But I think we should all be on a committed path to self-growth.
Yeah, it's the tool that's helped me the most because it's helped me understand my motivation, not just my behavior. Because you and I can show up and we can behave exactly the same, but your motivation and your needs are different than my needs. That's where it's really helped me understand myself at a deeper level.
And conversely, we could show up with the same kind of motivation, but behave totally differently.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so fascinating.
Yes, great point.
So the takeaway there, I'll just say this out loud for all my listeners here. This is a great tool. And Roxanne, I know you offer courses where a person can come and they learn more or do a typing interview with you so that they can understand their type better. And you can point them to some resources for how to really utilize this in more depth. I'm a big fan, as everyone knows, of just any tool you can use for self-reflection and self-understanding. But once we identify some of these habitual responses with or without an assessment, and I know like, oh yeah, I can see myself there. I know that I try to escape or whatever. Then what? What do I do with that, Roxanne? How do I become a better leader and simply have a greater, more positive impact on the world as a result of knowing that?
Okay. So this is the part that folks are going to go like, I don't want to.
I don't want to because it forces me to look at my stuff.
This is what my somatic teacher, I think, calls sometimes voluntary suffering in a way. This is where we have to have some compassion towards ourselves. We have to bring in some curiosity because when we start to recognize, when we bring self-awareness in and we see, oh, I have this reactivity, right? So for me, it's this pushing forward in my body. It's this sense of tightening in the front of my chest. It's this feeling, this like defensiveness, armoring up around my heart. All of these things, I have to be able to pause and breathe. And this takes a lot of practice. You know, Viktor Frankl's quote, between the stimulus and the response, this is where our freedom lies. That's no joke. It's like we are triggered and then can we create enough of a pause, enough space that I can now be with myself. So what do? Quick little little hack here is like, I feel my feet on the ground. I say, Mother Earth is cradling me. Now you don't have to be woo woo like Mother Earth is cradling me, right? That's me. I'm a little woo woo. So I can feel the sky kind of pulling me up. And then I ask myself, where's your heart? Because I know I have a defended heart. So these little quick, whether it's a word, whether it's a phrase, whether it's, hey, I can't talk about this right now because I can feel the reactivity. I can feel all my energy up into the head. I can't even feel my feet anymore. I need to take a break.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to show up in the way I want to show up. So this pause is so critical. And this is why these little Qigong practices before you go to bed, pulling in the energy, pulling down, getting heat out of the body, all of these ways help remind the body and get us into that kind of place of self-regulation quicker and quicker. So then you can do a little 30-second practice and get yourself grounded. But it takes time to get there.
You have to open the neural pathway, so to speak. You have to open the channels. And
Exactly.
the more you open the channels, the faster it goes, right?
Yes. Yes. And so again, I know it sounds like really she just wants me to breathe and pause and recognize. And yes, and that takes some time and practice. And that's what I'm offering is just those tools on how do we do that? How do we support ourselves to be able to do that? And there's a framework I learned in my narrative Enneagram training when I was certified that was developed by Dr. David Daniels, who was the co-founder of the school, these 5 A's. And awareness is the first one. We've talked a lot about it. And then the second one, acceptance. Can I accept without having to change, fix, ignore what is happening? And let me tell you, Claire, this took me a long time. I got stuck here.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to accept. It's like, I don't want to. And so this is where the voluntary suffering comes in because I just want to go to action. I want to go to step 4. I don't want to accept, and I certainly don't want to appreciate. This is me from my type structure and my resistance. You can hear it in the way that I experienced these A's. And so I think it's a nice framework to start with this work of awareness, acceptance, or allowance even is another one, appreciation. And then after that, I've paused. I'm able to stay with myself. Now I can move to action. That's the 4th step. And then the 5th one, not a fan, is adherence. So people are like, oh, now I have to practice? Yeah, it's a nice framework to do some of this work within.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So awareness, acceptance is number 2. And then appreciation. I'm going to accept that this is what's happening and what is real. I'm going to appreciate it. And then what's number 4? Action.
Action.
Okay. Appreciation, action, adherence. I'm going to continue to strengthen those good positive habits.
You could find those on Dr. David Daniels' website. He goes into each of those, and it's a great tool.
Awesome. It's really just a way of working with what is,
Present moment as it is.
meeting the present moment as it is. I love that. I think it's critical for us as leaders because ultimately, if we can't be present with what is, we're going to show up and start looking for who's to blame, or we're going to take sort of the wrong action. We're going to take misplaced action or something like that. Now, you and I have talked about how what's happening on the inside is reflected on the outside in a sense, right? I know this, if I am in a chaotic state of mind or I'm experiencing a lot of anxiety, I'm going to project that all over the place. Say more about this.
So we bring into the organization whatever's happening for us internally.
Right.
So it's like the more we can go inside and start to shift our internal landscape,
Yeah.
and we feel more happiness, we feel more joy. Here's the interesting thing. You start to recognize, independent of what's going on externally, I can actually still feel joy. I can still feel peace. So the more you shift that, you don't have to effort so much to shift the external. You see people trying to change all these external circumstances. And it's like what happens is as we go inside, those things just naturally start to shift. If you're feeling more peace internally, you bring that into your organization. If you're feeling more joy internally, you bring that into your organization. When the organization has an intention to come together, to work together, to create, to have more safety, more connection, we have to feel this in ourselves.
Yes.
It's like, do we believe that we deserve to belong?
Right.
This was a big one for me. I had a real unconscious belief that I didn't belong. And so I worked and worked to belong to organizations, and it was me. I was standing in my own way, right?
Yes.
If I don't feel connected to myself, how am I going to connect to others in the organization?
Right. I talked about that a little bit in my episode on psychological safety and just how we have to bring our own sense of safety to the circumstance, as well as the organization having a responsibility for creating the right kinds of expectations. But ultimately, just like you said, like the organization can do all kinds of things. But if I don't feel a sense of calm, secureness in myself, I better work with that because no external circumstance is going to heal what I have to heal on the inside.
Yes. So psychological safety is like, am I safe in my own being? Do I feel safe inside? And this is where I think about my work in jails. That was a real big ask because there was no inside safety for most of those folks for, again, a lot of different reasons. So that's where we start.
And it's so interesting because I just feel like all of us have a starting point and a place where we could develop, whatever that is. And some people have had much different circumstances than others. But ultimately, we all have to come to peace and understanding with where we're starting, be aware of it, accept it, appreciate it, and move forward so that we can continue to grow and change.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And stay with that mindset of leaning into the mystery of it all.
I love it. Yes, we are a mystery. Not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be appreciated. Roxanne, thank you so much. This has been a truly wonderful conversation. And I already know that you're going to have to come back on again. There's so many more things for us to unpack together. But how can people reach you if they would like to know more about your work?
The best way to reach me is probably through my website, which is simple. It's just roxanneharrison.com. And they can email. There's some workshops that I'm offering. There's one in July coming up. And I'm actually going to be offering a little cohort working around the somatic Enneagram coming up soon. Reach out if you're interested in being a Qigong client. I take private clients. I work with groups. I've worked with some of your groups. So that's the best way to reach me.
Excellent. Thank you again so much, Roxanne. Really wonderful interview. Can't wait to learn more and have you on again soon. Make it a great day.
Thank you. May the Qi be with you.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about my services and for lots of free resources and additional tools to enrich your journey, visit my website and subscribe to my newsletter at clairelaughlin.com. If you have a question about leadership, teams, or organizational culture you'd like me to address on the podcast, please reach out to me at support@clairelaughlin.com and connect with me on social channels at Claire Laughlin Consulting. Until next time, lead the way.